Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here from the University of Central Florida, and I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about Chapter 6, Fighting Hate, the Psychology of Reducing Prejudice. Your author begins this chapter by summarizing some experiments that have focused on reducing tension, conflict, and hate in group settings. And so you can read about the contact hypothesis, the robber's cave experiment, and also the jigsaw classroom. And in this chapter, we see that there's a variety of strategies and techniques that are proposed as interventions to reduce prejudice, discrimination, and hatred and violence. Also, there's discussion of common in-group identity. And here we begin to look at in-groups and out-groups and how people categorize other people based on group affiliations and memberships, and also how people recategorize, how that can occur as well. And you can trace historically and even in more recent time periods how this categorization, recategorization has occurred. Also, we can look at changing legal, social, and cultural messages. And so here we can look at changes in the legal system. So obviously hate crime laws would be one of the major examples there. Also changing perceived cultural norms, and this may be done through a variety of methods. And one of the things that's discussed is looking at mass media and the messages communicated through the mass media. Of course, I would say that families and the school system and religious institutions and communities and neighborhoods are extremely important as well. The author then moves to a discussion of anti-hate groups and focuses on several well-known groups. And what I would really recommend is to go ahead and visit the group's websites and explore the websites, look at their, what they're all about, what they do, their goals, how they achieve their goals, and you'll see they also have a lot of educational materials, curriculum, for example, for hate reduction programs in the school system. One group has a whole section on identifying hate-related symbols, and so that's very useful if you are in law enforcement. I believe that's the Anti-Defamation League has that. And you can look up symbols and see what they mean. And so some of those groups that are mentioned, in addition to the Anti-Defamation League, also the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Salman Wiesenthal Center, and the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. So you can take a look at these groups and some of the common themes that run throughout these groups and other anti-hate groups is an attempt to combat bigotry and violence through a variety of methods, such as creating social movements, educating the public, advocating for changing laws, and so on. And also some of these groups monitor hate groups and also collect data on hate crimes. And if you look at this data, the data sets, for example, in some of these groups seem much more extensive what we have at the public criminal justice level. In other words, that there may be more details to cases that are available. People may report to these groups rather than to law enforcement in some cases, and may feel more comfortable talking to these groups. And so that's a situation where we begin to see an important aspect, and that is cooperation and collaboration between anti-hate groups and law enforcement and the criminal justice system. That some of these groups offer excellent training for law enforcement and correction professionals in regards to hate crimes. Also, there's government initiatives for fighting hate crimes, and as I mentioned before, hate crime laws, but also we've seen some more specific areas, for example, the National Church Arson Task Force. And so you'll see that there are many government initiatives and also some changes that occur over time as well. Other anti-hate approaches that are discussed, for example, are local initiatives, which are conducted in communities, and the examples provided in your textbook are the Not in Our Town in Billings, Montana, and also Project Lemonade in Springfield, Illinois. Also, there's a discussion on the internet and hate. And of course, we see that while there are many hate groups that have established themselves online, there are also many anti-hate groups that have also established themselves to counter the hate group messages. And we see some different techniques that are used in this whole area, and your author discusses in more detail cyber squatting and Google bombing. And so, of course, we still want to know the extent of approaches for anti-hate online. One thing I will mention real briefly, and that is that we have a lot of research emerging looking at online hate. And your author had some discussion on that in an earlier chapter with some of her own research and doing content analysis of hate groups and looking at the interconnections, the networking, and so forth. One of the interesting features is that you can also look at some of the trends and patterns of search terms. Look at Google Trends. Google Trends is just fascinating to explore. I always tell myself to limit my time looking at Google Trends or other trend analysis programs, because I might spend a couple hours before I realize, well, I have other stuff to do, like make this video and get back to work there. But I mean, there's really all kinds of techniques and strategies that can be used to rapidly analyze large data sets regarding hate. Whether it's Twitter or Facebook or YouTube and Google searches, there's just a variety of new methods. A lot of these methods are used in marketing. And so we can borrow from the business and marketing world and the big data science world to conduct our research. We can also conduct an ethnographic online study, if you will, over time, being part of the picture or observing, or being a combination in that regard. Of course, anytime that we conduct research online and we involve ourselves in any way, we have to go through the UCF Institutional Review Board to get our study approved. I always mention that we just can't go out there and do research. We always have to go through, present our proposed plan of research, and the Institutional Review Board reviews that to make sure there's not any ethical concerns, or if there are, that we address those ahead of time. That's just a side note. I'm not going to test you on institutional review boards, but that's real important to know and to follow. Dealing with hate crime offenders. Different methods are presented, such as the restorative justice model, also counseling and education programs, and other less formal efforts. For example, having an offender visit a Holocaust museum, or pairing up an offender with a mentor who can guide and help them to understand their hatred and the negative effects, for example. And there are also civil remedies, such as lawsuits against organizations or groups or individuals. And of course, one of the important features is assessing the success or the effects of anti-hate interventions. And so we've already had some discussion about the effects of hate crime laws, and also we start taking a look at some of the other research in the textbook on, for example, victim offender mediation. There's further discussion about the contact hypothesis, and that's helpful as well. And so we can look at also social recategorization, changing the laws, and changing the cultural norms. And so this chapter covers a lot of material, and you can kind of review that and then try to integrate that into a holistic model of understanding how we could approach anti-hate interventions from various perspectives. And this wraps up this video. Thank you.